this entire problem started, precipitated from, and has ended up today is on Wall Street. The Wall Street stock market system is a very well masked and very well developed extreme system of financially asymmetric warfare protocols. The definition of financial asymmetric warfare is a collection of protocols that are used to bring down a country and its society from within for the purpose of being able to skirt or eliminate or to minimize the use of force. What we as Americans have been taught for the last 100 years, since 1913 with the meeting at Jekyll Island when the Fed was established, in reality, in fact, is a lie. That lie, to keep it from being publicly discernible and discoverable, has been wrapped in a number of enigmas. Unfortunately, the sad and shocking reality is that nothing in our country today is as it seems. After 1913, subsequent to the meeting at Jekyll Island, when the Federal Reserve was formed and approved by Congress, that meeting laid the groundwork for these financially related asymmetric warfare protocols to be implemented such that the theft and confiscation of the majority of the financial and real assets in our country could be taken from Americans who have for the last 100 years believed that they, to the contrary, were investing in our country and in their own best economic interest, theoretically, by buying stocks, bonds, and securities on Wall Street. The federal government cannot exist or survive without the support of the Federal Reserve. Can't happen. Because the federal government has never generated so much as $1 of net operating profit on anything it's ever done. It is a consumer of money, not a generator of money. The Federal Reserve is a 100% privately owned and controlled financial godfather to the country. The federal government, through the Congress, and because of its bureaucratic, political, and character impotence, voluntarily voted, weren't forced. There were no marches in the streets. There was no argument. The government voluntarily voted to give the Federal Reserve the status, although constitutionally it's totally illegal, to be able to issue all the currency. When they issue the currency, they are issuing you monies that were not generated by the government. They are being loaned, the government is being loaned monies owned by private entities. Let me say at this point, there are going to be some areas here that are going to be, I think, quite controversial because, as we have discussed, I'm pulling all the stops. Not going to use soft language, not going to fail to name anybody. So throughout the next few shows, there's going to be quite a bit of controversy from the standpoint that we're going to be naming people, places, organizations, parts of the world these controlling entities reside in and come from and exercise their influence on us from. What the Congress did was exactly what the German Congress did when they voluntarily voted to make Hitler a dictator for life. The federal government does not control the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, contrarily, controls the federal government. The Federal Reserve controls the federal government by controlling all the money, principal and interest, by the federal government. The Federal Reserve's control of the federal government is manifested by the fact that in the last 100 years, the Federal Reserve has never allowed itself to be fully audited. Secondly, no part of the federal government has ever stepped up to the plate courageously to say, we're going to audit you whether you like it or not, and if you don't agree to it voluntarily, we're going to change the laws, we're going to boot you people out of the country, and we're going to find out what's happened to our gold. We're going to find out what's happened to Fort Knox. We're going to find out who of you are in bed and are doing business, maybe illegally, most likely, with who else. That's never happened. The government has continually blessed these crooks to continue to perpetuate their criminal cabal, their fraud, and their theft with no legal exposure. The Federal Reserve discloses that it is controlled by its 12-member banks. The question is, who owns and who is the controller of the 12-member banks? The answer is that entity called CEDE, CEDE Company, as the sole registered shareholder of most of the stocks in this country and nay, the world, through its parent holding company referred to and named as the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, or DTCC. Companies, including banks, are ultimately controlled by their shareholders, not their respective boards of directors. Money, constitutional or fiat, is the grease for the gears, which without, nothing's going to happen. The Federal Reserve, by its own disclosure, is controlled by its 12-member banks, which are owned and therefore ultimately controlled by their sole registered shareholder, being CEDE Company. We're going to talk about in great detail how that logistically and technically happens, so you as a listener don't have your head explode and don't understand how you get from A to Z without going through every letter of the alphabet. CEDE Company, very importantly, is the nominee. Keep that name in mind, that word in mind, because it's going to come up a lot of times. Is the nominee for the DTCC, through which CEDE Company becomes the sole registered shareholder of all companies trading securities, regardless of their nomenclature or type, on Wall Street. Now, the Depository Trust Company, DTCC, is a wholly owned operating subsidiary of the DTCC. And that Depository Trust Company is a member of the Federal Reserve. The Depository Trust Company, through its parent holding company of the DTCC, is by far the largest and singularly most powerful member of the Federal Reserve. So if you think about the Federal Reserve as you would any other, quote, fallaciously and erroneously nomenclatured publicly owned company, the operation of the board of directors as it relates to the control of that company is, quite frankly, no different with the Federal Reserve than it would be for any other publicly owned company. Why is that so? Because the DTCC through its subsidiaries, which we'll get into great detail on, actually owns the equity stock that represents 100% of the ownership of the 12 member banks that sit on the Federal Reserve's board. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is controlled by the DTCC. The majority of all financial activity in our country, upon which the national economy depends, operates through, is obligated to, and is controlled by Wall Street. And the sad part is it operates under the auspices of congressionally approved and passed asymmetric warfare legislation that allows Wall Street to do, without oversight, whatever it wants to do. What are the conclusions of the snapshot picture? One, the golden rule is that he who owns the gold makes the rules and has the control. Two, through its subsidiaries, the DTCC owns the majority of all private, public, civil, and commercial, financial, and real assets in the country. When we're done at the end of this series, you'll have no question as to why that statement is so accurate, true, and meaningful. The DTCC, therefore, effectively owns and in actual reality controls Wall Street. The DTCC, through its subsidiary, the Depository Trust Company, is the largest controlling member of the Federal Reserve. Therefore, since the DTC is a wholly owned subsidiary of the DTCC, that means the DTCC controls the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve controls the federal government by controlling its access to the funds 100% loaned to the federal government every single time the federal government needs so much as a single dollar. 6, these funds are loaned to the federal government by the private Federal Reserve. We will talk in detail in the not-too-distant future about why that statement is so meaningful. Because the federal government is indebting you, thee, and me to the monies that are expended by the federal government because it's not their money. They're borrowing it from the financial gods that are located ultimately at the bottom of the rabbit hill, or at the top of the pyramid, if you prefer to term it that way, the City of London. And we're going to shine a lot of light on those folks, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who ain't going to be very happy about it. And that's just fine with me. It's time to get serious, people. The federal government must collateralize its debt, which it owes to the private banks that operate through the Federal Reserve. Through its citizens, that means they collateralize our earning abilities through the Social Security system and other methodologies to use us as American citizens as the collateral for the infinite, no-ending, never-ending, no upper limit monies that are loaned by the Federal Reserve to the federal government. This is the reason why income taxes that are paid by all Americans are paid to the Federal Reserve to service, here's the key phrase, only a portion of the interest on the debt owed by the federal government to the private Federal Reserve. In other words, for the last 100 years, the federal government has been indebting itself. And there were some people who attempted to be, I'm gathering, somewhat honest when they put us in bankruptcy as a nation in 1933 through the Emergency Banking Act, which has never changed or made to go away. They've been borrowing money at a rapid rate. And if you look at the aggregate number of dollars that has been borrowed by the federal government from the Federal Reserve, and you apply a nominal interest rate on that money, you will see quickly that the amount of monies collected each year from the taxpayers in the country, that money in total is less than the per year or per annum interest charge on the amount of money spent borrowed. Doesn't even come close to deferring and paying back the principal. That's not a mistake. That is by design. It's called control. The principal debt owed by the federal government to the Federal Reserve is not serviced, nor is it reduced by the income taxes paid each year. But yet the IRS and its Gestapo tactics treats everybody like we're actually living in a jail, when in fact they're taking your hard-earned money to pay off debts that are being criminally increased on an annual basis. The integrity of America in what is supposed to be an open, free, capitalistic financial market has been decimated by the DTCC-controlled Federal Reserve and the financial stranglehold it has on the federal government. Last point, number 12. The breathtaking reality is that the federal government, through its political cowardice and impotence, gave its blessing voluntarily and legislatively to the Federal Reserve to place this stranglehold on America and its citizens. I'm just going to ramble through quickly some of the names that are going to be referred to in this show and in those shows to come. These are the major players who individually and collectively have blood on their hands pursuant to the crimes they've committed. The U.S. Congress, the Federal Reserve, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Depository Trust Company, the Fixed Income Clearing Corporation, this one you'll like, the Mortgage-Backed Securities Clearing Corporation. If you are taking notes, you ought to write that one down. Mortgage-Backed Securities Clearing Corporation. It again, that one entity is where most of our mortgage documents got securitized and subsequently destroyed. It is likewise a wholly owned subsidiary of the DTCC. CEDE Company, as the self-regulating organization and nominee for the DTC. We'll talk in great detail about self-regulating organizations so that you'll understand explicitly what that is. I'll give you a 10-second blurb on that now. A self-regulating organization is a classification of entity supported by congressional action through the SEC and others to be able to obtain a classification called SRO, self-regulating organization. It means exactly what it says. It means that no entity, private or governmental, has any oversight on or control in what those entities do. Why is that important? Because the Depository Trust Company is an SRO. CEDE Company is an SRO. Last two I'm going to get into today. Euroclear. Euroclear is one of two major European and soon-to-be global through BRICS trading organizations that's answerable to, directly and indirectly, the DTCC. It's interesting to note that Euroclear was formed by, who else? J.P. Morgan Bank through its Brussels Morgan Guarantee Office facility. The last one is Clearstream. Clearstream is another DTC cohort and collaborator in Europe that basically does in their geographic areas the same thing that the Mortgage-Backed Securities Clearing Corporation and the DTC do right here in this country. How much money are we talking about? If you take a micrometer on a single new uncrumpled $1 bill, each dollar bill is supposed to be, according to spec, 34 ten-thousandths of an inch thick. $1 million is 27 feet high. $1 billion is 5 miles high. $1 trillion is 5,178 miles high. A quadrillion, which is the number we're going to be talking about, is 5,178,000 miles high. So that gives you a little mental picture about how many dollars we're talking about. How did this asymmetric warfare plan become fueled, developed, and put into operation? The answer is a three-letter acronym, IPO, Initial Public Offering. All companies, local, state, and federal governments who issue stock, bonds, or securities does so through the Wall Street stock market system and are therefore controlled, those operations are controlled by Wall Street. How does Wall Street obtain the voluntary participation by these entities that are conducting their IPOs when at the end of that process, the very companies that are conducting or desiring to get funding through an IPO end up losing control of their company without their knowledge, or if they do know it, they do it voluntarily because they get greedy? The answer is money. Here's the way that plays out. You have a company founder who entrepreneurially starts a company and develops a product or a service that they desire to bring to the marketplace. As in most cases, to do that, the average founder does not have the necessary funding or monies to develop and grow the company and bring that product to market. The largest volume of funding available at a single source to that founder is by developing a document called an initial public offering and then selling it through the Wall Street stock market system. Since an IPO document in most cases is multiple hundreds of pages long and is predominantly composed of complex, contradictory, and intense legalese, what we have found over the last 30 years, because we looked into doing on some of our aviation operations, the founder may not even realize what he is doing or what the net resultant effects are going to be on him after the IPO is completed. He doesn't even realize what he's doing by approving for sale the IPO developed by his legal counsel. Unknowingly, in many cases, the founder is giving up the ownership, the actual equity ownership of the very company that he founded in return for what is, in effect, an upfront financial payout of the future profits that have not yet been earned. Now, in many cases, this upfront payout of not yet earned future profits is the founder's motivation. After the founder, in many cases, realizes his upfront payout, he starts thinking about his own selfish best interest, and he concludes that if he is subsequently contracted to stay on in some executive role, chairman, CEO, he actually considers that additional financial compensation as gravy because he's already made so dead blame much money as his take net of the IPO. He's got all the money he ever needs. So what am I saying? I'm saying that in most cases, after the upfront payout is realized, the founder has been effectively paid off, has made huge profits, and privately doesn't even care if he stays with the company. He's bailed out. A recent example of that would be Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, who in less than 2 hours went from being a person of relatively average means to being worth $2 billion. From the time the offer went public, 2 hours later, he's got $2 billion. Now, what are the specifics? What are the steps by which Wall Street gets control of these companies? Because you have to remember that every single entity, be it a state government, a local government, a governmental, an entity, a GSE, a government-sponsored enterprise like Fannie Mae, or what was originally a private company, what steps do they go through to raise the monies that they need for whatever the project is they're trying to accomplish? Here's the way it works. Before the IPO is offered through a Wall Street exchange, the offering company creates on its own books, on its own stock registry, maintained by the corporate secretary in most cases, the original equity stock that represents the true ownership of the company as it exists prior to the IPO being formalized, approved, and subsequently offered for sale.